It was 2:47 a.m. when my ceiling shook so violently that my body reacted before my mind did. My heart leapt into my throat, my muscles tensed, and I sucked in a sharp breath like I'd just been startled awake from a nightmare. But I wasn't asleep. I hadn't been asleep for hours. I was lying there in the dark, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sound I already knew was coming. And right on cue, it happened. A scream exploded through the house, raw and furious, muffled slightly by the floor, but still sharp enough to cut straight through me. My younger brother was yelling into his gaming headset again, raging at strangers on Call of Duty like his entire existence depended on that match. That was the moment something inside me finally cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, in a way that scared me more than anger ever could. If you've ever laid awake at night while someone else destroyed your peace without consequences, stay with me. And before we go any further, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story is for everyone who knows what it feels like to be unheard in their own home. My bedroom was downstairs. His was directly above mine. That detail controlled my life more than I ever wanted to admit. Every stomp of his feet hit the floor above me like a hammer, sending vibrations through the ceiling, through my walls, through my bed, and straight into my chest. It wasn't just noise, it was physical. I could feel it in my ribs, in my jaw, in the way my shoulders stayed locked and raised long after the sound faded. Each time he lost a match, the house paid for it. He didn't groan or mutter under his breath like a normal person. He screamed. Full volume, rage-filled screams packed with insults, accusations, and threats directed at people who couldn't see the damage he was doing below them. And when words weren't enough, he stomped. Hard, violent, deliberate. Like the floor itself had personally betrayed him. I lay there gripping my blanket, not because I was cold, but because my body didn't know what else to hold on to. Sleep became something I calculated instead of something I expected. I stared at my phone, watching the time crawl forward minute by minute, my mind doing the same math over and over again. If he stops now, I might get 4 hours. If he keeps going, maybe 3. If he really spirals, I'll be lucky to get 2. My alarm was set for 6. It always was. Early mornings didn't stop just because I was exhausted. Responsibilities didn't pause because my brother couldn't control his temper over a game. And the cruelest part was knowing that while I lay there counting seconds, he was wide awake by choice, fueled by adrenaline and rage, completely indifferent to what his actions were doing to me. What made it unbearable wasn't just the noise. It was the awareness behind it. He knew exactly where my room was. He knew I worked early. He knew I had interviews coming up, deadlines, anxiety that already lived under my skin even on good days. I had told him, more times than I could count. At first, I asked politely, calmly, like a reasonable person trying to coexist. Hey, can you keep it down a little? I have work tomorrow. I really need to sleep. Then my voice started to change. It got quieter, more careful, like I was afraid of provoking something worse. Sometimes he ignored me completely. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he snapped back that it wasn't his problem. And sometimes, the most painful option of all, he got louder. Like my request itself was an attack. Lying there in the dark, listening to him rage, I felt small in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. Small, invisible, reduced to an afterthought in a place that was supposed to feel safe. That night felt different, though. As another scream echoed through the house and another stomp rattled my ceiling, I noticed something shift inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger had burned itself out weeks ago. This was something colder, heavier. A realization settling into my chest with terrifying clarity. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't just a phase. This was my reality unless I changed it. He had no reason to stop. My suffering didn't register to him as a problem. It was background noise, collateral damage. I lay there staring at the ceiling, jaw clenched so tight it ached, and thought about how tired I was, not just physically but emotionally. tired of explaining, tired of asking. Tired of being considerate in a house where consideration was one-sided. I also knew something else, and this realization was just as important. I couldn't confront him head-on. He was volatile back then, unpredictable, the kind of person who took any challenge as a personal insult. If I stormed upstairs and unplugged his console, it wouldn't end the noise. It would escalate it. If I yelled, he'd yell louder. If I forced the issue, he'd retaliate in ways I didn't have the energy or safety to deal with. Whatever I did had to be quiet, subtle, invisible. It had to look like bad luck, like coincidence, like the universe itself was against him. Because the only thing worse than being exhausted was being exhausted and at war inside your own home. As I lay there in the dark, heart racing, listening to him rage above me, I understood something that would change everything. This was the night I stopped begging. This was the night I stopped hoping he'd care. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from patience, observation, and choosing the kind of revenge no one sees coming. And that's where this story truly begins. The nights started to blur together after that. One scream melted into the next, one stomp into another. Sleep stopped feeling like something natural and started feeling like something I had to earn, like a reward I was no longer worthy of. My body was constantly tired, but my mind never shut off. Even on the rare nights when he went quiet earlier than usual, I couldn't relax. I'd lie there listening to the silence, tense, waiting for the next explosion from above, because my body had learned not to trust calm anymore. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. Every vibration sent a spike of adrenaline through me. I wasn't just tired. I was living in a constant state of alertness, like my nervous system was permanently switched on. Mornings became brutal. My alarm would go off, and it felt like I had just closed my eyes. My head throbbed, my thoughts moved slowly, like they were wading through mud. I'd sit on the edge of my bed staring at the wall, trying to convince myself to stand up. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me anymore. Dark circles, dull eyes, a face that looked older than it should have. Coffee stopped helping. It just made my hands shake while my brain stayed foggy. People around me started noticing. "You look exhausted. Are you okay?" I'd smile and say I was fine because explaining felt too complicated, too embarrassing. How do you explain that the person making your life miserable is someone you're supposed to call family? The worst night, the one that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it, was before a job interview. I had spent weeks preparing, researching the company, practicing answers, imagining myself finally getting out of that house, finally having independence. That night, I begged him. I hated myself for it, but I did. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, voice quiet, almost shaking, and asked him to please keep it down. Just for one night. Just until morning. He barely even looked at me. He waved me away like I was interrupting something important. And then, somehow, he got louder. That night stretched on forever. The screams, the stomps, the vibration of the ceiling. I watched the clock hit 3 a.m., with tears pooling in my eyes, knowing my chances were slipping away with every passing minute. I failed. That interview. Not because I wasn't qualified, not because I didn't prepare. I failed because my brain wouldn't work. My thoughts felt disconnected, my words came out wrong, and I couldn't focus long enough to answer simple questions. On the drive home, I pulled over and cried in my car. Not dramatic sobs, quiet, exhausted tears that came from a place of complete defeat. That was the moment it stopped being just annoying. That was the moment I realized his behavior was actively damaging my life, my future, my sense of self. And what made it even worse was knowing that when I walked back into that house, nothing would change. He would still scream, still stomp, still sleep soundly afterward while I paid the price. Fear started creeping into my thoughts in ways I didn't expect. Not fear of him hurting me physically, but fear of what this situation was turning me into. I was irritable, short-tempered, numb, I snapped at people who didn't deserve it. I cried over small things. I started dreading nightfall because I knew what it meant. Another battle I didn't ask for. Another night of waiting for someone else to decide when I was allowed to rest. I felt trapped. Financially, emotionally, physically. Moving out wasn't an option yet. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the stability. And the idea of asking my parents for help felt useless. They either didn't hear it the same way I did, or they minimized it. He's just gaming. Boys will be boys. Those words cut deeper than the noise itself, because they told me my suffering didn't matter enough to address. I started to notice something else, too. My brother didn't just get angry at the game. He fed off it. The rage energized him. The louder he got, the more alive he seemed. And that realization scared me, because it meant asking him to calm down wasn't just ineffective. It was pointless. I was asking someone to give up the very thing that made them feel powerful. Lying in bed one night, staring at the ceiling while his voice thundered above me, I felt something shift again, a quiet resolve taking shape. I stopped thinking about how unfair it was. I stopped thinking about how tired I was. Instead, I started thinking strategically, observationally, like someone studying a problem instead of suffering under it. I paid attention to patterns. When he got loud, when he got angriest, what triggered the stomping, what seemed to calm him down, even briefly. I noticed how deeply invested he was in staying connected, in staying online, in staying in the game. The game wasn't just entertainment. It was control, status, escape. And as that thought settled in, another one followed, slow and dangerous. If I couldn't control him, maybe I could control the environment around him, the house, the systems, the things he took for granted. Lying there in the dark, listening to him rage above me, I realized I didn't need to overpower him. I just needed to outthink him. By the end of that week, I wasn't just exhausted. I was resolved. The fear had been replaced by something steadier, quieter, determination. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the only one suffering. Something was going to change. And when it did, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be obvious, and it wouldn't lead back to me. By that point, I wasn't just surviving the nights anymore. I was studying them. Lying there in the dark, eyes open, body exhausted but mind sharp, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not like a victim, but like someone looking for leverage. I noticed how predictable he actually was. The rage didn't come randomly. It came in waves. He'd start calm, joking with people through his headset, confident, almost cocky. Then one bad match would flip a switch. His voice would rise, his words would get sharper, his feet would start tapping, then slamming, like the floor itself was to blame. And every time, without fail, there was one thing he cared about more than anything else: staying connected, staying in the game, staying online. The idea of being disconnected, even for a moment, seemed to hit him harder than losing itself. That realization didn't come with fireworks or dramatic music. It came quietly, almost accidentally. One night, as I lay there listening to him shout above me, the Wi-Fi hiccuped. Just for a second. Nothing major. A tiny blip. Upstairs, his reaction was immediate. No, 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 what the hell? The stomp that followed was different. Not rage, panic, real panic. And then, just as quickly as it came, the connection returned. He calmed down. His voice lowered. The stomping stopped. Silence followed for a few minutes. I lay there staring. At the ceiling, heart pounding, a strange thought forming in my mind. That wasn't anger I heard just now. That was fear. Fear of losing control. From that night on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The game wasn't just entertainment for him. It was his escape, his power, his identity. Everything else in his life seemed to fade when he put that headset on. And the idea that something as small as a momentary disconnect could shake him that badly, that stayed with me. I started replaying it in my head during the day, during work, during quiet moments when I should have been thinking about anything else. What if the problem wasn't him directly? What if the problem was access? What if the thing making him unbearable was also the thing I could quietly control? I also knew I had to be careful. Anything obvious would point straight back to me. Turning the router off completely? Too noticeable. Unplugging cables? Too risky. If the internet went down for minutes at a time, questions would be asked, accusations would fly, and I would be right in the line of fire. No. Whatever I did had to be subtle. It had to look like bad luck, like servers acting up, like the universe randomly deciding he didn't deserve a clean connection tonight. Lying there one night, phone in my hand, scrolling mindlessly just to distract myself from the noise above, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. The router login, the admin page, the settings no one ever touched once the Wi-Fi was set up. The idea scared me at first, not because it was complicated, but because it felt powerful. Too powerful for someone who had spent months feeling powerless. My thumb hovered over my phone screen as my brother raged upstairs, my heart beating faster as the thought fully formed. If I could access the router, I wouldn't need to shut anything down permanently. I wouldn't need to break anything. I wouldn't even need to be near him. I could change one small thing, for just a moment, long enough to kick everything off, the network, and then change it back, a blink, a hiccup, a mystery. To him, it would look like a server issue, a lag spike, something out of his control. And that was the part that made my stomach flip. Control. For the first time in months, I wouldn't be the one at his mercy. I didn't act on it right away. I needed to be sure. I needed to know this wouldn't blow back on me. I tested it during the day when no one was gaming, no one streaming, no one paying attention. I logged in quietly, my hands slightly shaking, half expecting something to go wrong. It didn't. Everything disconnected for a split second. Then everything came back. Seamless, invisible. No alarms, no notifications, no evidence. I stared at my phone, pulse pounding, a slow smile creeping across my face before I could stop it. This could work. This could actually work. That night, as darkness settled over the house and the familiar sounds of gunfire and shouting started up above me, I felt different. Not calmer exactly, but steadier. Prepared. My body was still tired, but my mind was alert in a way it hadn't been in weeks. I lay there listening, waiting. Not dreading the noise this time, but observing it, timing it. When his voice crossed that line from excitement into rage, when the stomping started, when the house began to shake, my phone rested in my hand, screen dimmed, finger ready. And as another scream tore through the floor above me, something inside me hardened into certainty. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to explain. I wasn't going to suffer quietly while he tore through the night unchecked. This wasn't about punishing him. Not really. It was about balance, about reclaiming a small piece of peace in a situation where none had been offered to me. As I lay there, heart pounding, listening to his rage build upstairs, I knew the next move would change everything. And once I started, there would be no going back. The first time I did it, my finger hovered over the screen longer than it should. Have. My brother's voice thundered above me, sharp and furious, every word dripping with frustration as another match slipped through his fingers. The stomping started again, heavy and deliberate, shaking my ceiling like a warning. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. What if this backfired? What if he somehow figured it out? What if I made things worse instead of better? But then another scream cut through the house, raw and unfiltered, and that hesitation vanished. I reminded myself of the sleepless nights, the failed interview, the mornings I dragged myself through with trembling hands. I wasn't doing this to hurt him. I was doing this to survive. I tapped the screen. Upstairs, the effect was instant. His voice shifted mid-sentence from rage to confusion. What? No, 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 no! There was a pause, then a stomp that sounded less angry and more panicked. I held my breath, staring at my phone, pulse racing. 30 seconds. That was all it took. I changed the password back. Everything reconnected, like nothing had happened. From above, I heard him exhale, mutter something about stupid servers, and jump straight back into another match. I lay there frozen, listening, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration flooding through me. It worked. It really worked. The house felt different in that moment. Quieter. Not because he'd stopped playing, but because for the first time, he wasn't in complete control. The second time was easier. His voice started climbing again, the familiar edge of fury creeping in. I didn't hesitate. Click. Disconnect. His reaction was louder this time, more confused. Are you serious right now? He slammed his foot into the floor, but something had changed. The stomp didn't carry the same confidence. It was sharp, reactive, almost desperate. I waited, heart steady now, and restored the connection. He jumped back in, voice tense, cautious, like someone walking across thin ice. I realized then that this wasn't just about interrupting a game. I was interrupting a pattern. His anger no longer had a straight line to expression. There was now a consequence, even if he didn't understand it. Night after night, I repeated the process. Never too often, never too predictable. Sometimes I let him play for a while. Sometimes I cut it short. The key was inconsistency. If it happened every time, he might question it. But random felt like bad luck, like the universe had decided to humble him. And slowly, I noticed the change. His screams became shorter, his stomping less violent. He still got angry, but there was hesitation now, like a part of his brain was calculating the risk. If I get too loud, will it happen again? I never said a word. I never reacted. I stayed invisible. There was something deeply satisfying about lying there in the dark, listening to him struggle with something he couldn't fight. He couldn't yell at the Wi-Fi. He couldn't intimidate it. He couldn't stomp it into submission. All he could do was sit there, confused and frustrated, while the house slowly returned to calm. For the first time in months, I started sleeping. Not perfectly. Not all night at first, but enough. Deep enough that I woke up feeling human again. My mornings became easier, my thoughts clearer, my body lighter. And every night, as I listened to him play upstairs, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. What struck me the most was how quickly he adapted, or rather, how quickly he was conditioned. If he stayed relatively calm, the connection stayed stable. If he exploded, it mysteriously failed him. I never planned it that way consciously, but the pattern formed on its own, a Pavlovian response. His voice would rise, then suddenly drop, like he was catching himself mid-rage. He started muttering instead of screaming. His feet tapped instead of slammed. The house grew quieter, not because he'd changed, but because he'd been trained. And he had no idea. I'd lie there some nights, staring at the ceiling, almost laughing at the irony. I had spent months begging him to be considerate, and it had done nothing. 30 seconds of lost connection did what words never could. And the best part was the deniability. I wasn't the villain, I wasn't the aggressor. I was just another person in the house, trying to sleep, while the internet did what the internet does. At least that's what it looked like to him. To me, it felt like balance being restored, one quiet night at a time. There were moments when guilt tried to creep in. Late at night, in the silence after he'd finally shut the game off, I'd wonder if I'd gone too far. But then I'd remember the interview, the tears in my car, the nights spent staring at the ceiling while he screamed above me, and the guilt would dissolve into something steadier. Relief. I wasn't ruining his life. I was reclaiming mine. And as the nights passed and the house grew calmer, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like peace. By the time weeks had gone by, this wasn't just a tactic anymore. It was routine, controlled, efficient. I didn't need to use it as often. The threat of it, unknown and unexplained, was enough. And that was when I understood just how powerful silence could be. He never confronted me, never suspected me, never imagined that the person lying quietly below him had completely rewritten the rules of the night. And in that quiet victory, I found something I hadn't had in a long time. Rest. The strangest part about winning a silent war is that no one announces it. There's no final confrontation, no shouting match, no dramatic confession. One day, you just realize the house feels different, lighter, quieter, safer. That realization crept up on me slowly. It started with sleep. Real sleep. The kind where your body finally lets go instead of bracing for impact. I stopped waking up with my heart racing. I stopped flinching at every sound. I stopped lying there counting hours like they were grains of sand slipping through my fingers. Night by night, the screaming upstairs faded into something dull and manageable, then into silence much earlier than before. Sometimes he still played late, but the rage was muted now, controlled, restrained, by something he couldn't explain. I noticed the change in myself before I noticed it in him. My mornings stopped feeling like punishment. I could think again. I could focus. I could hold a conversation without losing my train of thought. My hands stopped shaking from too much coffee and too little rest. I started performing better at work. I started feeling like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken after all. I had spent so long blaming myself for being tired, for being irritable, for struggling, that I hadn't realized how much of it was situational. How much of it came from living in a constant state of disturbance. When that disturbance eased, so did I. Upstairs, my brother never said anything directly, but the signs were there. He complained about the internet more, about lag, about servers, about how the Wi-Fi just isn't consistent anymore. I would hear him mutter to himself, frustrated but confused, like someone arguing with fate. Once I overheard him telling a friend through his headset that the game had been acting weird lately. Another time, he slammed his desk and said something about how he couldn't risk getting mad or it'd just disconnect again. That sentence almost made me laugh out loud. Almost. I stayed quiet, neutral, invisible. I never reacted. Never smirked. Never slipped up. To him, I was just there, existing, harmless. Weeks turned into months. The conditioning stuck. He learned, without ever realizing how or why, that staying calm kept the connection stable. That losing his temper came with consequences he couldn't fight. The house settled into a new rhythm, one where I wasn't constantly sacrificing my well-being for his ego. And the most ironic part was that things between us actually became easier. Not close, not warm, but neutral. Without the nightly explosions, there was less tension during the day, less resentment simmering under the surface. It was like removing one rotten beam from a collapsing structure and suddenly the rest stopped creaking. Eventually, I moved out. Not dramatically, not in a blaze of independence, just quietly when I was finally able to. The day I packed my things, he barely looked up from his screen. Life went on. Weeks later, I came back to visit, sitting in the living room, chatting. Casually, when he said something that almost exposed everything. "You know," he said, scrolling on his phone, "the Wi-Fi's actually been way better since you moved out." My heart skipped for half a second. I kept my face neutral. I shrugged. "Probably less bandwidth," I said. He nodded, satisfied with that explanation, already moving on. That was it. That was the closest he ever came to the truth. Driving home that day, I thought about everything that had happened. About how close I'd come to losing myself to exhaustion. About how many times I'd laid awake feeling small and powerless. And about how none of this revenge involved cruelty or humiliation. I didn't embarrass him. I didn't hurt him. I didn't even confront him. I just quietly stopped allowing his behavior to control my life. And that realization brought a sense of peace I hadn't expected. Revenge didn't feel like triumph. It felt like balance, like justice restoring itself in a way that didn't leave scars behind. Looking back, I don't feel guilty. I feel validated. Because boundaries don't always come in the form of conversations and compromises. Sometimes they come in the form of consequences, especially when words fail. I learned something important during that time. Power doesn't always belong to the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the quiet one who's paying attention, the one who adapts, the one who refuses to suffer endlessly just to keep the peace. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's this: you're not weak for wanting rest. You're not selfish for protecting your peace. And you're not wrong for finding creative ways to survive in situations where direct confrontation would only make things worse. Sometimes the smartest revenge is the one that looks like coincidence. The one that teaches a lesson without ever revealing the teacher. If this story kept you hooked, if it made you feel seen, or if it reminded you of a time someone pushed you too far, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and in the comments tell me where you're watching from and whether you think this revenge was justified. Was it harmless justice, or did I go too far? And if you've ever witnessed or carried out a quiet revenge of your own, I want to hear about it. Because the loudest victories aren't always the most satisfying. Sometimes, the sweetest ones happen in silence.